I'm Dave Trippin. This is the Interstice podcast, and today we are joined by Phil, who is you've been here for.
I've been in Japan for short story since 2004.
2004.
Yeah. So 16 years this stint, and I was here for a couple years before that too. Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah.
How long have you been at? I'll interject here to say, guys, if you want to get your questions answered on the podcast. We'll be doing a little bit of that in the second half, that you can get a hold of me at davetrippinon@gmail.com, and chances are you get your questions answered here. And we've got Phil here today with all this experience, so that'll be interesting, and the following podcast, you should get in there. So I thought like a cool thing we could talk about is the fact that you've also, for a large portion of this time, worked at private schools. Mm-hmm. Or is it only the one? That's a good question. I could just...
Yeah. So I've been here since 2004, and I've been at the same school pretty much the whole time. And
okay.
Since I was in Japan for a couple of years earlier, worked at a language school.
Okay.
And then I came back after a couple of years back in Canada, and yeah, I've been at the same school ever since I got back, pretty much.
Which is, I think that's kind of cool, because it's sort of like, it dispels the myth that there's such a transience to like everybody who works here, that it has to be moving from job to job to job to job. Mm-hmm. But I mean that, like you've done, you could be in the same place with such continuity is pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on what people's goals are when they get here, right?
Yeah.
So if they're here to travel, then they're probably going to travel around.
Yes.
And maybe at the expense of something. But if they're wanting to have a longer stay in a certain area, then probably like anywhere else, you try to make some roots and dig in and stick around. So
I think it's fun to talk about. This is a subject I've done like a little bit on the podcast recently, but you also, this is something Phil's got, most people don't have here. You were a licensed teacher in Canada.
Yep.
You're like a teacher. You're one of the the real ones.
Maybe,
But another thing there that I think is cool to observe, lends itself to like an interesting conversation, is like what the differences between the public versus private. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering what do you identify when you look at the private school experience that's succeeding or failing as compared to the public?
Well, I to be honest, I don't have any Japanese public school experience other than where my kids go.
Well, that's fine.
Yeah. So, big question as far as what is going on well and not so well in certain areas. I mean, I think, I don't know if I have a good answer for that right now, to be honest.
Okay.
Yeah. But I mean, as far as, compared to, public school or private school in Japan versus where we're from Canada, big differences for sure. But
big differences.
But largely based because it's a very big cultural difference too, right? So.
Yeah. The thing I'd point out, I feel like you'd have something to say then, if I can point us in this direction, is just the size of the classes.
Yeah, so I've heard from other colleagues at other schools. I mean, our school where I'm most familiar with is, I guess, a typical homeroom class.
Yeah.
Is probably around 30 to 35 students.
Right.
I have heard from other colleagues who work at different public schools that it can go higher.
Right.
Like up to 40 plus.
Right. And then how many people are we teaching in a class? What's a big class for you?
Big class for me would be probably, most recently probably would be about 13 or 14 kids.
Which is wild.
Yes.
That's so low.
Yeah.
It's nothing. And I mean, then another thing that we have, and you guys have heard me go on about, is like, do you have an advanced class this year?
I do. I have a couple.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So those, I mean, it depends on the school, of course, but those would tend to be a little bit smaller, probably, because
way small.
Yeah.
So how big are your advanced classes?
I have 9 in one, and then I have 5 in another.
Yeah, which is just incredible.
Yeah,
this is like, I think that like one of the most profound things that comes out of that, I actually believe that this is the most significant thing. And I would love to hear, whether you agree, disagree with this, like that it's actually, when you look at all the reasons that you might go to a private school, there's cool, call it gold linings as opposed to silver. Like maybe you go on trips more often, maybe you have access to like better facilities.
Mhm.
But if I named the best thing that you get for your kid, it's that their class size will be smaller because the whole
Yes
thoughts.
and no.
Okay,
Yes
good.
and no.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, I think it depends on
Okay.
the school for sure.
Okay.
You know, in the area where we're working and living, private schools, I think they need to have a market and niche for the most part, right? So
Okay.
a lot of private schools, I would imagine this is also the same in other countries.
Mm.
They want to entice a certain type of student who might be interested in a certain kind of program.
Right.
So school A might be really well known for its sports program.
What are we known for?
English.
Are we? Oh, really? Okay.
I
Of
think-
course,
yeah,
because
yeah,
we're
yeah.
so good.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, but a certain school might be known for sports, and they actually recruit, and they have some sports teams that go to, and here in Japan, anyways, that
Yeah.
go to national tournaments, and they
Okay.
get recognition and notoriety for that. Another private school might be well known for its rigid or stringent or very nice, I suppose, depending on how you want to frame it, academic program where they really students who love to study, they will love a program like that.
Okay.
Another school might have a bit of a well balance where they might do a little bit of both sports and study. Other schools might have a more of a global outlook where they want to get students, traveling and going on these trips overseas or those things. So there's, in my experience, anyways, within our area, there's a little niche of different types of private schools.
Okay.
Yeah, and that doesn't always mean that, as far as maybe some people watching are looking for, what might that transfer into a job,
Mhm.
or the work requirements for said teacher. I think it depends on the type of school you land at.
Okay, so that's cool. I guess it's like one of those classic things again where my opinion says more about me than the schools, where it's like if I had to name what I thought was most useful to the kids,
Right.
I think it's the class sizes. But
Absolutely.
in fact,
Yeah.
the way in which they're operating is not necessarily with that as a priority. Like the priority might be for the private school that to create a niche for itself, it's either like academic or sports,
Yeah.
or whichever else it is that allows it to stay afloat.
Sure.
But I can't help, like that's my kind of tangent, is that I just noticed like book I read recently that was about lifespan. The whole like thing that the guy talks about in the book, he says that like what kind of reveals the sort of like archaic behavior that we have is how we are trying to apply blanket medical science to everyone,
Mm-hmm.
where as we evolve, what's going to happen is that we'll get like much greater individual care
Mhm.
because we're so genetically different.
Mhm.
And if you tailor each sort of like, because we all like, given that genetic difference, then we also react to medicines differently
Sure.
and to everything.
Yeah.
And so like who's going to do well in this kind of surgery or who's going to react to this drug matters. And I see that, I was like, wow, that's kind of interesting because I see that paralleled when I look at like the very obvious impact of smaller classes.
Yeah.
Because the whole thing is that the kids get more exactly what they need as a
Oh,
sort
absolutely,
of like,
yeah.
you apply this like there is a way to teach and you just paint the whole class with that, where it's like that's so obviously wrong.
Yeah.
Like you can't do that. Like it's every single kid they're so unique, but it's true
Yeah.
without even being facetious. Like they really are. And then I see it like narrowed down further and further and further, like when you get into the advanced classes, where then you have like 9 kids, where I think you could maybe make the mistake of thinking that because they're in an advanced class they're succeeding, where I would say certainly it's because they're in an advanced class and the content of it may be higher, but again I think the greater benefit to that kid when they're in there is actually the number of kids in the class.
Yep.
Because if they have an issue, they're like, oh well, okay, what did you need to know, how do we fix this for you? Like it gets dealt with so much better, and it becomes like I'm talking about, becomes personalized.
Yeah.
Where you're like, I mean, this is more in a like a comedic way, but like even for me in my advanced classes, I've like, because I know from their homework, I'm started to learn like their preferences and their interests.
Yeah.
If ever I do any sort of prompt, I can link it back. Like
Sure.
this is now me just like stroking my ego, where I was like, I have been so brilliant recently.
Listen to the things I've done in
Yeah.
class. Yeah.
But it was like we were gonna do. We're doing some writing practice. They were learning about how to create a better paragraph, or what even is that, as opposed to just stream of conscious. and having a topic sentence. And then I went through their homework because there's only 6 kids' homework to go through. And I found topics that interested them. And in that class, when I then like put the prompts on the screen, each of them was like, "Oh, I love that thing. I love that." And
it's mine.
Yeah, they're getting such an engagement.
Yeah.
Where you try to do that in a class of 26, you die. Let alone you couldn't get to every topic in that class.
Yeah.
Well, even if
we
you
are spoiled in that regard, for sure.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm not trying to interject too much, but like it's perfect for students if you have that ratio. And that's what a lot of English conversational schools, that's one of the merits, is a lot of the times they'll have that small class size, right?
Yeah.
For a school, you know, the smaller the class size is the better. You know, you hear that over in lots of places in North America, class sizes are getting out of control. It's a bigger question that need not be discussed here perhaps, but you know, when you have the smaller classes, obviously you're going to be able to cater to the kids a lot more. You can see their strengths or weaknesses, and you can get into what they need. You know, basically let your teaching be driven by the needs of the students, right? Versus I just gotta get through this class with 50 kids in the room, right?
Totally, and I hate how in the larger classes it sort of devolves into larger classes. To me, turns into this weird sort of like teaching philosophy, where you're applying these like broad stroke methods where you're ignoring this like fundamental problem that you cannot individually address needs, where that is the sole problem of each class, you know.
Well, I mean, I think it's a really good place for teachers, especially less experienced teachers, to cut their teeth on a smaller class, because then you can figure out what kind of teacher you want to be or who you are as a teacher, right?
Yeah.
Because if you get thrown into the fire with a class of 30 kids and you're not really sure what you're doing, the kids are going to pick up on it like that.
Yeah, they're bloodhounds.
Absolutely, yeah. You know? So, I mean, ideally, obviously, we'd love to have small classes, but you know, I think when you get to a point where you're comfortable in front of that class of 30 people, 35 people, then you know, man, I think I kind of know what I'm doing right now.
That's
you know?
It's a sort of trial by fire.
Yeah, no, but I mean, like, there's obviously there's an experience curve to get to that where you feel comfortable. It's the same thing as public speaking. Really, right?
I see what you mean. You're saying that like that is advanced to speak to 30 people.
Yeah, I would say if you can teach a class of 35 kids, or students, I should say. Obviously, it depends. I mean, high school, junior high school, even elementary school. If you can do that, you got something going on in a good way.
But the funny thing is, though, that's what you start at. Where you're saying the way that you would want to start people is with these smaller building to that. But the truth of it is that they start with 30, and if you're lucky, you get smaller.
Yeah, well, so that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
So when you get there, that is trial by fire, and there's nothing wrong with that. You know, I remember my first teaching experience. This is back in Canada. I was at a school that was not at the high end of the academic spectrum.
Such a great euphemism.
You know,
that was wonderful.
It was not at all.
Well put.
But I was a green teacher. I was new, and obviously I wanted to make sure that I at least looked what I knew what I was doing. I think I did fairly well. Yeah. But the things that I learned at that school were amazing that I carry even now. This is 20 years ago.
Totally.
You know, and you know, then you get to a school where it might not be as challenging, right? You have a smaller class size,
which is wonderful.
But still, if you have that thick skin, that armor already there, then I mean, obviously experience speaks for itself. But
well, I talked to you about that recently. Yeah. Like I've made at the same time, in a way that I haven't condemned my previous experiences, like you're saying they're useful. The school that I came from was just. Especially for a couple years. The first year I was there were different problems, but the kids weren't crazy.
Right.
But then, you know, whatever hormonal shotgun they got in the second and third year that I was there, they were horrible. And so now, when I go into a class and I have rowdy kids, I don't know the word, kids, it's kind of like it kind of makes me laugh. Or I'm like, oh, sweet summer child. You know, you're just like, if you only knew.
Well, it's interesting over here in Japan too, when you juxtapose to maybe what people might be used to in their home countries, whether it be North America, Europe, or anywhere else. Yeah. You know, teaching is one thing, but obviously the audience, the kids, are a completely different thing. Like you can think, I know what I'm doing. I've got the skills, the know-how, the repertoire, the arsenal of whatever I need to do to control a class. But until you get into a classroom of this audience here in Japan, for example, it's a whole different beast from kids in Europe, for example, or in North America. The kids are maybe a little less mature than some places in some aspects, but they're also very creatively more endowed than other places. Like they're really, really creative kids here.
That's interesting. That's interesting because I feel like that's counterstatement. All you usually hear people saying is that like children here, because of the rules and because of like the cultural what I want to use, like normatism that like everyone's supposed to be like homogenous.
Yeah.
But then you're saying it's not. You're saying they're actually.
I think they're waiting to be unbridled.
Okay.
But they're so into a certain kind of regimen, of what they're trying to do. But then you give them a chance to kind of let loose, and that obviously not in every case. But there's a lot of creativity in any kid, obviously, and in any kid,
that's true.
Flowers are red.
Yes. Yeah.
But then if you can tap into that, then obviously there's all sorts of wonderful things you can do. Getting the kids to let their guard down is one of the hardest things I've found in any way in our class, because they're so used to doing things the way they're supposed to do things.
Totally.
So they're not used to a different kind of teaching style from people who are from other countries. We've had kids that go overseas to some schools, and it's the first week of an overseas trip is always the worst, because it's just trying to mesh new teachers, of course.
Yes.
But also new teaching styles.
Totally.
From people from all, like we go to Europe for a lot of trips.
Yeah.
There's European teachers from all over, wonderful, great teachers.
Yeah.
But the students are not used to seeing that style, and they're used to a certain style of more traditional, maybe Japanese style teaching from their teachers.
Absolutely.
Here. So that takes them for a bit of a spin, but it's a good experience for them too. They adapt like kids do.
Yeah, like kids do. But I mean, it is a great observation. Like that's something probably I haven't even thought about, because I'm like you have your what do you want to call it, like your blinders on, or we're like single-minded. But I don't think of how I would innately be different from the other classes that they take in the school. How they come into my classroom and it's suddenly like probably a very, very, very different thing.
Yeah.
Let alone, if they go abroad and then they have a whole nother experience.
With the other challenging thing I've found, this is not even necessarily, well, I guess it is related, teaching related, but the kids mature, obviously, like any kid does, but at a different rate than you might expect. Like I find second year junior high school in Japan is when the kids kind of start to kind of really feel, I guess maybe in grade 8, for example, in North America.
Yeah.
That's when things get problematic.
Don't they even have like, there's a term in Japanese for the way that they become so like sad and strange in second grade blues,
the terrible twos.
I don't know, like I think there's like a technical term.
I don't know the name, it doesn't come to me right now.
Okay.
But you'll see the terrible twos, the terrible second years. That's at our school anyways. That's when they're no longer the newbies, because they're
totally
second year.
Totally.
There's all sorts of stuff going on in their mind and bodies. Puberty's really starting to kick in, especially more for the boys, because they're a bit later. Psychologically, friends are the most important thing, of course, and you really see it.
That's a good observation.
They don't care much about what's going on in class as much. Of course, there are some the earnest kids, and then you see from like third years, it's a little bit of the same. And then you see them get into high school, and that's when you really can kind of see a bit of a change.
That's been a great thing for me to interject there. Like, this is the first time I've ever taught high school aged kids.
Right.
And it's not autopilot, because that would be a disservice to what you're trying to accomplish there. But I'm just like, they're not complicated at all. Like, I know they are. There's a lot going on.
They mellow out a little bit.
Oh, wow. Like, I cannot believe the amount of like, I've always had the approach, I lend my thinking towards treat people like little people. Right. I always, even when I was in elementary school, maybe to my detriment, I was affording too much, like, act like a self-reflective sentient being, and it's like they're way too autopilot. But
get those puberty hormones out of it.
Yeah. But no, like you say, I have two. So what would it make them in grade 5?
In North America, they would be grade 11.
Okay, so so they're like 15, 16, these kids.
Yeah.
And they come in and they're just chill.
Yeah.
And the things that you tell them to do, they're like, okay.
Yeah.
Like, I think where the classroom management is more like a thing that matters in the earlier grades.
Definitely. You
start to feel with the older grades where you're like, I better do something teaching interesting, because now my energy isn't given over to trying to organize them. But what they are more deeply aware of is if you're just wasting their time.
For sure. Yeah.
So now it better, and I can tell like the lesson better be tight, because they'll like just tune out in a second.
Likely they're gonna want. I always figure like, what can the student feel like they've left the classroom with?
Sure.
Whether it's a good or bad impression, hopefully it's neither nor. It's something. Hopefully it's a good impression. But is there something tangible or that they can feel like, yeah, that was worth my time?
Yes.
Right. Because they're smarter than junior high school kids. They're more aware of what they want to do and why are we doing this. And you know, if you're gonna be in there all the time, just next page, next page, next page. They're just gonna tune out and not really look forward to that class, right? So,
totally. Yeah. No, but I relished it. I've enjoyed it so much. The whole like, do this.
Okay.
And they did, all right, sure, I'll do it. I won't necessarily do it with great like excitement, but I'll totally do the thing you told me to do.
I had, I'll say years ago, not to be specific, but I've had many different students, but I had a particular student years ago who we just always landed in the same room. He was always in my class.
Okay.
For many years, right?
All right.
And we had a healthy respect for each other.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right.
I think I did. I don't know if he did for me, but he graduated eventually. Not eventually. He graduated on time, of course.
All right.
But it was really cool because at the end of it, he came up to me and he didn't hug me, but he basically came up to me and he shook my hand and he said, "I'm so sorry for when I was in junior high school."
Okay.
It was great. I'm like, don't worry about it. You're in junior high school, right?
Yeah.
So they become self-aware too. Like it's just, it's a rite of passage. You know, you gotta be a teenager. A young teenager for a while too, so
it really is. There's and it's so fun. It is an endless challenge to take things with the right degree of like intensity. I don't know if you want to call it that. Like and the worst thing that you can do, and it's weird because people say it's just business or it's not personal. Things are innately personal. That your whole life, I mean, that's the whole nature. Your subjective experience is personal. But while that will remain true, you can't ever do anything regardless of that truth. You cannot act in any way personally, although it is all personal.
Not the best, but a really notable piece of advice I got from one of my senior colleagues when I was going through teachers college. And it's not profound, but it really stuck with me because it's so simple and it makes so much sense in the classroom. Yeah. Especially the classroom. Don't take anything that kids do personally.
Right.
Because it's not about you.
No.
It's about them most of the time, and you're just in the way.
Right? Yeah,
you're just in the way.
You're this thing that they're operating through in their lives.
You have a bad day one day with student A, B, or C. The next day they come back, and they might remember a little bit, but give it a week, they forgot all about it.
Yes.
Most of the time, right?
No, that's very true. That observation about... Unless, I mean, there are certain, because this is like, there's no law that you can apply to this, because sometimes you do hit a memorable experience that scars them and you that they may carry with them. Yeah. But I think you could definitely err on the side of what you're saying. There was I had a time recently in a class where the girl was like, she's a great girl in the class. And I was trying to get her to understand whatever, the target grammar was, and she just wouldn't get it. And jokingly, lovingly, with a piece of paper, this is defending, this is this sounds like abuse, you're making all these excuses beforehand. I tapped her on the head, I was like, oh, you'll get it. And when I tapped her on the head with the paper, she went, I don't get it, Ricardo and I. And I was like, whoa. Yeah. And I was immediately scared of that moment because I was like, because I don't know what filter she's put through that, where for me it's nothing, where I was like, I'm not attacked, I don't think you're a stupid kid, but you never know what a kid is going to internalize. Sure. Yeah. But then, I could actually see in the next lesson, she was just blissfully unaware, where I was like, okay, so that one was totally, you could let it go, which you can err on, but I do feel like you need to be you do need to be aware for some of this stuff that will linger.
Oh yeah.
Like that.
From a teacher's perspective, I think you can't take it personally because of what we already talked about.
Right.
But the other side of that I think is really important is don't make it personal for the students in a bad way. Yeah. Personalize the teaching, personalize the good stuff. But when the bad stuff comes along, don't make it personal because that's not, we're professionals. That's not our job, is to take it out on a kid, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I mean, in the heat of the moment, personally, everybody brings baggage with them, whether it's the kids or the teachers. Yes. Right? So just gotta check it at the door and, have a short memory of the bad stuff, hopefully, and just get on with it, right?
And you always, I mean, the reason to follow that as a law, where I say there's no laws, but you could follow it like law, is that never has taking it personally ever worked. And now, there's never a scenario where you're like, I'm glad I really took that personally as an affront to my religious beliefs, or,
Right.
like whatever it is. It will I've only ever seen, I guess it's a weird thing because there's like different kinds of escalation, like what would you call it? A sort of objective escalation
Right.
works.
Yeah.
Objective escalation works, but you can never, like we're talking about now,
Based
it's
on
like
a ranking system.
system
That
is totally, it is an escalation that has nothing to do with a personal feeling. Where I had like, I would share this with you recently, which I was really happy because I've seen this happen before. I have this one student, and I can tell where I've like, I am tuned into the fact I am in his way. He's like, he's one of the energetic kids. He's one of these kids, screw English, all these kinds of things. But I've like also been able to establish a certain degree of like, again, just like we're talking about a little bit here, the kids in their own way, almost like primally, instinctually, they're very intelligent.
Yeah.
So weakness, not that they're objectively going, this is a very weak teacher, but their behavior will totally adapt to weakness almost subconsciously.
Yeah.
So there is a sort of like, don't be weak. You can't do that kind of thing. And so something like, if somebody is, to give him credit, this I thought was a great way to describe this kind of scenario. It was by Jordan Peterson, and he was saying, don't allow children to do things which make you dislike them.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, that's a very practical way where then the onus is then on you to diffuse that situation. And I don't...
I also remember that as a dad sometimes too.
Oh, okay, yeah, right, yeah,
my
exactly.
own kids, I mean, because they're just doing their thing. They're jumping through their hoops. They're doing what is right in front of them.
Yes.
What they need to do.
Totally.
And so I cut you off there, but we have to be the adults in the room.
The adults, exactly. And I was, for the most part, in my classes, this is probably a little bit unusual, this created a problem because of like the way that I would normally do this, but generally as a rule, I'm probably on the more like open-ended hippie side of like the way in which I manage classrooms.
Sure.
Which one of the like cardinal sins is probably don't let students sit where they want to.
Right.
Where I've actually found that's overrated. For the most part, I'm like, you know what? Let them sit next to their friends. Then assess if the class has gone to shit because of that choice that you made.
Yeah, let them earn it. Yeah.
And or let them earn it. Like if it's not a problem.
I mean, let them prove that they can do it.
Yeah, prove they can do it. Then it's fine. This kid, no. Horrible decision on my part. I should have never let him decide where he sits. And finally I was like, so move over there. And that was like I was like, if I let you sit here, I'll run the risk of allowing this to become personal.
Right.
But I moved him over. And then after that, it was kind of cool because this is another way too, that again, kids like, they'll regulate themselves depending on the dynamic.
Yeah.
Where he came in the next class and he started to go back. I was like, no, you're over there. And he was like, and he started to like kick up. And to me, I was like, I just leave it as a joke where I'm like, so long as I don't need to always have this like put my foot down, I can laugh it off and be like, no. And it was one of the other students in the class that was like, swat it, like told him to sit down. Just shut up. Like you're being a nuisance in the class. Or I was like, isn't that another fascinating thing where if you can establish a level of respect and there's the right kids in the class, they'll look after themselves, but you still need to create a baseline. That was really fascinating, where I was like, isn't that like that scenario to arrive requires a whole bunch of different things to occur, but man, was it interesting to observe.
With that, I mean, from the student's perspective, we see a lot of the time, like that one student, he might be like, all right, he's making me sit in this seat again, right?
Yeah.
The other students helping out obviously is great because they've shown, hopefully they respect the classroom, which is the atmosphere we're trying to create. I've had situations, I think when I was a high school student at the time, and I was probably that kid getting told to sit down in the seat or whatever happened. The teacher was telling me something like, all right, I'll do it today. And the thing that dawned on me as I started teaching too is at that time with my teacher, I started seeing, I think he's just picking on the guys more, trying to kind of, be the cool teacher. And it stuck with me. Then I started, in my teaching career, remembering that feeling. And it came up, I don't know if it came up in my classes per se, but it made me think about like classroom management and making sure that consistency is a big thing.
True.
Right? So we don't realize all the time in our daily lives trying to get from class A to B to C to E, whatever we're doing, students see it in a completely different lens that we might not perceive, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, for me, I try to, if I'm telling a student, you can't sit there, you have to sit there, then I want to make sure that it's full scale for everybody. I'm picking the seats today, everybody, or something like that. So that one student might not feel, oh, he's picking on this particular group of people, or he's picking on me.
I do feel that. I feel that he's been given these opportunities where I was like, I didn't tell anybody to sit anywhere.
Right.
But like you've been up there at the front and you refuse to pay attention. And it's more than anything, it's you can't handle it.
Yeah. When
you sit next to this person, you talk to them the whole time. I wouldn't even care if you just dealt with it in a better way. But I do, like when you talk about that whole like favoritism is something I'm like hyper aware of. That's something that like even in it's funny too because it enters into like sort of a weird balance where you need to not favor, but then there's a time and a place for. I'll articulate first. I tell these stories in reverse. So basically, if you are gonna ask a question in class, and what is most important about asking that question is actually the response. Not that you be fair and ask everyone.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with knowing that there is a student likely to answer that question very well and being like, well, let me just ask you.
Right.
You know, what's the answer to that? And then their answer will inform everyone else.
Right.
But then that you allow yourself to do that sometimes, but then you don't start to explicitly only ask specific people.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah. You can't, I know I need an answer. I'm going to ask the strongest student in the class because I know that person will give me the answer.
Right.
Students pick up on that all the time. And then you might ask them and they're going to become reluctant to answer because now you're asking me.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, or you get the like, have you ever read Ender's Game?
I haven't. No.
Okay. Yeah. So like you get the intelligent student that resents the attention of being intelligent.
Right.
Because school isn't cool. Yeah. And they don't want to be known as the smart, teacher's pet nerd who answers everything. Yeah. And so you start to ask them and they're like, yeah, I don't know. Yep. Leave me alone. Stop like putting me, out in front of everyone so I become a target.
Well, they don't want to be the nail that sticks out. That's the whole thing in Japan, right? They don't want to be the one that gets hammered down for better or for worse.
Or for worse, yeah. So no, you really... You do, and it's a challenging thing, of course, because as I say, you cannot create laws because there is always like exceptions to these situations that you'll enter into where, actually you should ask most people in the class, but if that means at the cost of now it's this person's turn to answer, and you know that this person is never going to give you an answer, and you're going to stall here for 3 minutes where you go, okay, all right, so we'll just say quiet, big voice, try it, no, okay, you, finally. Yeah. Where you're like, it will save time, just in this one instance, I'll ask one of the sharper kids, we'll get it out into the open, you guys will know what's going on.
Well, we all have classes, whether it's here in Japan or elsewhere, where there's just reluctant students who are a little introverted, right?
Yeah.
But for the sake of trying to include everybody, you have to try from time to time.
From time to time.
But it often blows up and slows things down when you could probably engage them in a different way.
Yeah.
They may be, they may not want to speak up. They may not be able to speak up. There's all these other things they may not be able to do. So you can engage them in a different way.
Yeah.
But I've had classes like that for sure. Like, come on, student.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the easiest ways, just because I identify the solution now I want to talk about it, is like an easy solution for that kid who can't. Just don't make them the first.
Absolutely.
Let them see this so they're modeled.
Absolutely.
This kid answers, this kid answers, and then, what do you think now that you've heard the answer 3 times? And then they'll be fine because their reticence is based more on their true misunderstanding of what's going on as opposed to... But then, that's why I say no laws, because then there is a kid who it's not their not understanding is the reason why they won't answer. It's that they never answer. So
the other side of it too is knowing your class and knowing the activity, right? You want to not out anybody, obviously. So structuring things so that they can maybe build up to that output.
Sure.
Group work, pair work first. Share some ideas. Yeah. Be comfortable with whatever you're talking about.
Yes.
Then open up a little bit more before you actually have a full class discussion, right? So building up to that big debut. You want to make sure they have a little bit of rehearsal, right? Yeah.
No, it is a tough thing with these. There's I don't even have a lot of them. There are just certain students who are like forever resistant, where the temptation is there, which I feel you have to like eternally resist. Just be like, all right, fine.
Yeah.
Were you now? I will never ask you anything
Yeah.
because I know, but I don't think you can ever do that. You
I-
have to.
I had a colleague years ago here in Japan, and
Yeah.
he just summed it up really, really well. He said, some kids just hate math.
Yeah.
Some kids just hate PE, right?
Yeah.
Some kids just aren't into what you're doing.
Yeah.
So you're pulling teeth if you're trying to sell them something they don't want to buy.
Yeah.
You can just do your best as you can and try to move along. And more than anything, a student who's like that, they're probably going to appreciate you more if you don't try to out them, but get to know them.
Yeah.
And get to know them in a way that they can feel comfortable being in class.
Yeah.
And then they find that there's a reason for them to be there. That's time well spent.
Because I do like there's one student I had recently where they seem to be that kind of typical kind where I was like, it's clear, all right, you will never do anything. But then it was weird. We like did an activity. It was like Jeopardy kind of thing, and where she has answered nothing before that she was willing to. And I was like, this is a strange development. I almost don't know what to think of this because in this instance, you were. So it's like, it's not that you're totally, utterly resistant. It really is that. And I mean, probably an advantage that I have is that I was in many ways still am such a horrible student that I was like, I totally empathize with the lowest level kids in the class. I'm like, that is exactly who I was. So I'm like, that shouldn't surprise me.
This might sound like a weird way to put it, but you don't want to dupe anybody or trick anybody. But in this instance, if you can dupe or trick them into speaking.
I don't want to say that.
But if you can kind of trick them into using language by like playing games, and games are awesome.
Yes.
If you say the word game, every student in your class knows the word game.
Yeah.
Maybe it's an English game, but it's still a game.
Yeah.
Right? Now you have to have the right game. I'm using game here too many times, but you have to have the right activity. Right?
Totally. I mean, this is the thing too. Like I thought, well, like it's the simplest thing in the world, but it's fun because it's a rhythmic challenge. Japanese kids know rhythm games. Like it's very popular in Japan. All you're doing is like this, and then whenever you clap, whoever's turn it is has to say a piece of vocabulary from the category.
Right. Yeah.
So you're like soccer, and then the next person has to name another sport, and that was still too much. Where I was like, I'm running out of options. Yet the Jeopardy game elicited a response. So I was like, okay, so it's not a total black box. There is something to get out of that. But maybe kind of the final point here is that like I do not have any sort of perfected system for these situations that you run into, and even if it is something that you've seen, it's really easy to sort of discount them as something you've seen. Where usually kids that I've seen like that before are also the sort of kids who would never. Where I was then surprised when they started to participate.
Yeah. In
whatever limited capacity in that other thing that we did. So I was like, okay, totally new thing. Well, there is sort of an opening here. I didn't realize that was going to be there. We're going to take a moment now, as I promised, since, we'll easily go into like a 2-hour thing here. We're going to jump into the questions here that have been sent in. Again, to remind you, if you want to get your questions answered here on the podcast, I'm sure we'll have Phil back again. Please write to davetrippin@gmail.com. So let's pick it up, and I'll let you field the first one.
Sure.
Okay, so let's jump in here. Try and see if this. And remember, when you write in something that I really enjoy, and it looks like this person, whether intentionally or not, remember to do so. If you tell me where you're from, I always really enjoy that because it's cool to get a sense of where everybody's tuning in from. And also, if you don't want your name read aloud in the email, tell me that in the first line of the email, not the end of the email, because I will finish and then be like, and don't read this out loud. Okay, so my name is Chris. I'm from the hills of Eastern Kentucky.
Nice.
And I study information technology and working on my bachelor's degree. The great thing about IT work is the highly flexible, what you can work with, so on. I'm outgoing. Let's see if I can get... First question, there it is. How many items did you bring when you moved to Japan? I understand space is sparse, but anything just to remind you of home or some item of sentimental value. Okay, so what are your thoughts there? Like, how would you pack? Light, strong? Bring your stuffed animal?
I packed really light
Okay.
because I think I told you earlier, I came with no money, or very little money. So that would be the first thing to make sure you are coming with.
Pack money?
Well, no, know what you're getting into, which I didn't when I first came.
Okay.
Yeah, so I mean that's a financial thing. So savvy people I wasn't at the time will know when their first paycheck is going to come. But as far as I think what to bring, yeah, pack light, and you're definitely going to accumulate things as you get here. Everybody does.
Yeah.
You know, a sentimental item that you might want to have. Obviously, pictures are easy to pack. They're really, really light and small, and those are always going to be good touchstones and tones of home wherever you go, right?
True.
Depends on what time of year you come. Coming in summer is different from coming in winter.
Yep.
If you come in summer, don't pack blue dress shirts for gentlemen because you're just going to sweat right through them.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, my first day, my first OJT on the job training, I had my fresh new blue shirt. I was ready to go down to Tokyo for my on the job training. And I was probably at a kilometer walk to the train station.
Yeah,
By the time I got to the train station, I was just blotchy blue all the time, trying to find the air conditioner on the busy, sweaty train. So,
that's awesome.
Yeah, so that's my advice.
Okay,
Yeah,
those are really good. I'm always at the. I like hyper minimal. I think not that everybody has this inclination, but when you're coming over, this is a chance to reinvent yourself.
Sure.
But for those of you who are like, I don't want to reinvent myself, it's probably the worst advice ever. But you'll usually, I'm not saying that if it doesn't, if it doesn't spark joy, get rid of it. I'm not saying that.
Doesn't.
But if basically you could probably realize there's a ton of stuff that you have where you're like, I don't know why I ever even kept this. So it's a good point to offload. Also, maybe an opportunity for generosity because you're like, you know what? I can't use this. It would be like hectic to bring. Maybe this person likes snowboarding. I'll give them my snowboard.
Don't pack comfort food right away because you're going to lose out on the experience of being in a new place.
Yeah.
I mean, that's obviously a matter of opinion, but a lot of people might hoard. I got to have my chocolate bar. I got to have this. But
yeah.
One of the reasons you're probably traveling is to try new things.
Yes.
So don't bring a treasure trove of things. That makes it that much better when you get back to it to kind of remember it,
Contrast is really important.
Sure.
I think that's true. Yeah. Yeah. So you can start building that up right away. All right. Second. What was going through your mind in the months before you made your decision, then leading up to the actual leaving home for a foreign place? What was going through your mind?
What was going through my mind? I knew I was going. I had been recently graduated from university, and I spent. I came over in the summertime. I came over in August, so the months leading up to me leaving, I was actually living in the bush tree planting.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it was a great distraction because I had to survive in the
sure.
bush. Yeah, and
the immediate moment is pretty important.
Yeah, I was there with my brother. We had a great summer. It was basically a holiday before I went away. It was the 2 months leading up to. And I mean, as far as the actual leaving part, I came over to Japan on my own. I didn't know anybody where I was going to, so it was very much an adventure. I was a bit nervous, but at the same time, I was excited. So. Probably natural feelings that most people would have when they're going overseas. In my case alone, and
right.
And yeah, I don't know. I was just kind of ready for it. I wasn't worried about. Well, actually, one of the things my dad said to me, which was kind of cool.
How old were you when you came?
I came. I was 22.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
Oh wow! Okay, so you were at the more traditional end, like younger.
Yeah. I came. I was 22, and my dad said to me, he said, "Don't think about us back home because we're only thinking of you like the astronaut up in space.
Mm-hmm.
We're always going to be here. We're for the most part. Obviously, circumstances change, but
yes.
But don't worry about missing anything here because ultimately, not a lot changes at home, right?"
I did notice that. That kind of leads me to a kind of cool observation. I did feel like now I've been here long enough that inevitably lots of things have changed.
Fair enough, yeah.
But I did feel like in the first couple years that I left, where it was like, for me, just massive experience, like crazy amounts of like, I did this and this and went here and this was new and this is totally, and I would go back and people are like, yep, pretty much the same.
Watching Monday Night Football, yeah.
So,
flew bowling with Dan.
Yeah, you definitely get that like, the whole thing, like it's when you travel closer to the speed of light, like time, is different for you.
Right.
Although actually that's the reverse. So it's like when you do that, you have an age where everyone else has. So it's the reverse of that. It's like everybody goes on the spaceship, and they have had like no time at all pass where you're like, I've remained on the planet. Yeah. And so much has occurred for me.
Well, then you get back home and it's like, what have I missed?
Yes. Yeah, totally. Okay, so I think I'm coming to the conclusion that I don't have an option but to leave my hometown. I've little more than a year before I graduate. If I have the opportunity to go to Japan, I might pack up and leave. Might as well make it an adventure. Yeah. I understand teaching English would be the job to get myself in the country, and I think I'll enjoy it. I love kids and people. Third, we got a third here. How difficult do you think transitioning from an English teacher position to another occupation are with the JLPTN2? What are your thoughts?
JLPL2, that's probably a very high standard in Japan. Yeah, if you have that, I mean,
you're almost over generous at that one.
Yeah, but to be honest, I don't think it's a prerequisite at most jobs, at all. No, it's going to make life easier. Yeah. But again, we said earlier, I haven't moved jobs for a long time, so maybe I'm not the best person to ask. Yes. But I mean, if you have language proficiency in any regard, it's going to make your life in general a lot more enjoyable. It'll make life at a job more enjoyable because you can feel to whatever extent that you're contributing.
For sure. Yeah. I think in terms of transitioning to other jobs, the transition is not difficult. What's difficult is finding what are these other jobs. Yeah. It's the same problem that faces people who want to like evolve their career in teaching. Yeah. Where like, well, what other teaching jobs are there? You just and for that though, it's the same way that it always is. You need to like just do your research. You're like, okay, I vaguely know I want to be in this field. Like there's so many things that I've learned about that I didn't even know were jobs. Like I've talked a lot about recently on the podcast that a lot of people are priests. Yeah. I didn't know that was such a huge thing in Japan, and people make crazy money with like minimal effort.
I know some friends who've been married by fellow English teachers that I used to work with.
Right.
And like, anyway. Yeah. It's a side gig, but you don't need JLPT for that.
No, you don't. And I mean, I know like I had a friend, again, this is kind of repeating a point, but like that he worked 10 days a month and made 250,000 yen a month. I was like, that sounds okay.
Is he marrying people?
Married as a priest. Yeah. Or I was like, and I mean, obviously it's this sort of piecework where you could do more of it or whatever, but I was like, I didn't know that existed.
Well, tail end on that question really quickly is most of the teaching you'll be doing, if you come as a teacher, they don't want you to be teaching in Japanese as a foreign teacher.
Oh, yeah.
So as far as JLPT goes, JLP2 goes, JLPT.
That's why I was like, it's mismatched to the... JLPT2 is for like mechanical engineer who wants to work for a purely Japanese firm or
but
something.
Even still, it's not enough, probably. You want to have JLPT1. Like if you have one, you can work in almost any industry. Okay. I would argue, but yeah.
There's a final question.
Yeah. Sorry.
What book do you recommend?
What book do I recommend? Well, if you're traveling...
It could be any book.
Well, I'm going to leave it on the traveling note because there's lots of books to recommend.
All right.
I would recommend, if you're thinking about going anywhere, Bill Bryson's Walk in the Woods.
Okay.
It's a bit of a metaphor.
All right. There you are. Yeah. Very nice. All right. So we'll go from there. Next one. Okay. Question for the podcast. This is very specific. Okay. Oh, no. That is the one we just read. Okay. So let's knock that one out. Okay. This is interesting. All in caps, major question continued, exclamation mark.
Oh, let me wipe my brow first.
Yeah, major question. Okay. So let's try this one here. People, you'll have to forgive me. I hope people tune in. This shows how long away I've been and I got sick and stuff. But this is from May 27th. So we're catching up a bit. Okay, so this is from Steph. She says... Oh, cool. From Scotland.
Oh, nice.
Hey, Dave. I subscribed about 4 years ago. That's wild. Thank you. I was considering teaching English abroad. I recently came across your channel, really enjoying it. I'm particularly liking the podcast. There you go.
Nice. Excellent. Good debut for me.
Yes. I have some questions I'd be interested to hear discussed. I'm sorry if you'd answered them before. Unforgivable. All right. Seeming like books, I'm interested in what books have had the most impact on how you view life, ethics, and morality. I'd love to hear some of your recommendations. I want to throw it back to you.
Throw me on the spot.
Yeah. I can talk about it if you want a moment to think.
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
Okay. I would say like it's funny. I'll add this caveat to
Thinking,
it.
by the way.
Yeah.
I'm listening.
Like sometimes I hate mentioning books because I've noticed that like the books derail the rest of the conversation. Where you were talking about this thing, you mentioned a book, and then everybody's like, "I have 2 cents. I have 2 cents," and then all it becomes is the book. But whatever. Since the question was specifically about that, we'll address it. So, if it were to talk about ethics and morality, or just like life in general, just life, I would say Meditations by Marcus Aurelius.
Mm-hmm.
And what I found crazy about that, I've said this before, but I'll say it again. I thought it was really interesting because I'm of the mind, or was of the mind, that I thought, how incredible must the changes have been from generation to generation as we evolve as human beings, and how different am I from the people who existed, however many years ago. That was always a view that I had held. And then I read that book, and what struck me probably most profoundly of all the like useful things that you could pull from it on like life and everything else, was that here is a guy 2,000 years ago. That's what like blows you away. You're like, I'm pretty sure this predates like, religious texts. That's like how old this is.
Yeah.
And his problems and his way of thinking is indiscernible from us now. And that's what really struck me, is I was like, there is this like thread of humanity that's shared for literally thousands of years. And I didn't think that. I mean, we have these social changes, and I would say we change like societally in significant ways, but the sort of like underlying consciousness has remained the same. And that I thought was like incredibly grounding, because it's like where our tendency is to feel alone and isolated in our subjective experience. I was like, I couldn't think of a more profound example of that not being the case, that you were like, our sort of experience echoes back, we're using gladiator lines, echoes through eternity here, it fits with the gladiator thing, to somebody who existed so long ago. And aside from that kind of like observation on it, it was that like what he says about your day to day, the practical lessons that he's then teaching you within that were really, really cool. So that's a go-to one. Cool. And it's incredibly short. It's probably like, it might be like 80 pages or something like that, because they're little journal entries. Yeah. A really cool thing about this, like one of the things I enjoyed in the like version that I read from its translation, was to make the point that this was never supposed to be seen by anyone. The whole point of the Meditations, like he said, like in a better translation, it was like for myself or something like that's what this was titled. And so as a personal journal, it was even more insightful, because people, when they write for others to view something, change their writing. It becomes less personal because you're considering your audience, whereas this was like so deeply personal, it made it that much more genuine. Okay. So yeah.
I don't think I can beat that.
We're not. Yeah. What do you?
Well, I remember the question: insightful or something book. I'm just going to go back to what I said earlier, because we're talking about a little bit being in Japan.
Yes.
I said Bill Bryson, A Walk in the Woods. That was actually the first book I read in Japan.
Okay.
Yeah, and that came from me at a time where I just met a really good friend of mine, who I still keep in touch with 20 odd years later. Nice. And he passed this book to me because he kind of saw something in my eye, like I needed something to read to take my mind off of being in a new place. Yeah. And it's been 20 years, I think, since I read it. But it's a very funny book.
Oh, cool.
It's nonfiction. If you're not familiar with Bill Bryson, he writes a bunch of different things. Yeah. But it's basically a journey of his. I think he's walking along the Appalachian Trail. Okay. I think I just hit the table at the wrong time. The Appalachian Trail. Yeah. And it's a fun nonfiction book. It's a very whimsical way in looking at life in certain ways, and especially for someone who's thinking of traveling, that type of book I think would inspire people, because it really can share other people's common experiences of being in uncomfortable places they're not familiar with. Right. And maybe a bit of a touchstone for some people. So
awesome.
I'll leave it there. Yeah.
So now, the second question was, do you follow any spiritual philosophy like Buddhism, Taoism, Stoicism? Have you ever been religious, or do you hold atheistic worldviews? This is totally a non-controversial thing. This won't light any sort of fires. I would be more curious to hear in the comments, what are your experiences of this? I'd like to know maybe this will be shaken out from the tree at a different time.
Maybe to add to the comments about life in Japan, if you hold any of those comments, comments part of viewpoints, has it ever been an obstacle or stepping stone with life in Japan?
That is a cool idea.
Yeah.
All right, let's go with that. Right on from sunny Scotland. Is it sunny? I thought Scotland was supposed to be really dreary and rainy.
That's the trick.
Okay, I see how it is. All right, so let's move on. All right, cool. We got a little, as I'm fond of saying, brevity is the soul of wit, and this is quite brief. So, it's from Mike. I was wondering if you might impart some wisdom regarding lesson plans. This will be your wheelhouse.
Oh.
You're like a teacher. What resources did you use to help create lesson plans without prior knowledge, and how to do so? As an Interact ALT, my current placements don't give me any opportunity to create any sort of lesson plans. Very much an assistant role there. The JTE does literally all of the planning. My situation is a little different this year, as I'll be assisting. Any tips to point me to cooks or what have you would be cooks? I think maybe books. I bet that's books. I was like, I don't know.
Book questions.
Yeah, let's see. All right. So yeah, what are your thoughts?
Well, I would say the short answer: think about where you want to get to. If you're trying to run a race, you want to make sure you can get to the finish line. So what is the finish line? What's the goal? And work backwards from there. It's well known to backwards planning.
Okay, so you mean you need to accomplish this grammar point or this thing? What do you mean by that?
So by the end of this lesson, think of this. By the end of this lesson, students will be able to do something. For example, they will be able to compare things.
Right.
I want kids to be able to compare things. That's where I need them to be. Now, my planning is going to be involved. How do we get them there?
See, that's a great idea. I'm learning things here too. Because I was like, wow, that's really practical. I've never done that.
Yeah, don't front end load your lesson. Think of it from the end. Like I said earlier. What do you want the kids to walk away with?
This is the antithesis of what I do. This is very useful, though. It's great.
Yeah.
There's no reason I can't learn in the moment.
Backwards planning. What do you want them to be able to do by the end of the lesson? Start there, and then figure out how you're going to get them there.
That's brilliant. That's really good. And it's it would make it probably, like you said, then you won't front load it with like 30 minutes of warm up.
Well,
which I don't do.
Ever.
I don't do that.
Yeah.
Okay,
the other thing I will say is keep it simple. Keep it simple because you might think it's a great idea because you can see things in your mind.
Yeah.
But consider your audience. Like, what is the audience? How are they going to see it?
Totally. Yeah. I do agree with. I think that's something I've seen from a few angles. I call it or it was said, like what I read about it. It's like the curse of knowledge is that you bring to bear what it is that you know, and then that makes you fail to realize what they don't.
Yeah.
Where you're filling in all these gaps. Yeah. Where you're then blind to the fact that they don't know any of these things that you just assume awareness of.
Yeah.
Okay, nice. All right, I think we got time for about one more here. So let's work into here. Okay, yep, this isn't too long. This is from Connor. Sorry in advance for the long email. Not too long. We'll see what we can do.
Time's ticking.
Yeah. Okay. Final question. This is from Seamus. He asks, I was under the assumption that getting a teaching job would be easiest entry into the country. Also, I've seen that tech companies will hire you and that also you can get a working holiday visa. So what are your thoughts about literally how is the easiest way to get into the country?
I don't know for certain. I mean, easiest way to get in for employment?
Yeah. Yes.
My own experience is from teaching. And it wasn't difficult because I had the right credentials.
Right. Oh yeah, especially.
So you need whichever way you come in. If you have the right credentials, then it should be as easy as the next job.
Yeah. Right.
So if it's IT and you've got the right credentials, then I don't think it really matters.
Yeah, I don't think it especially matters. I think it's a funny thing too. You're like, wow, I've had like a few roadblocks once I'm here where I'm like doing this or that thing. And visa questions become more complicated. But if your dream is to simply get into the country, then opportunities abound. I've known people who've done it in every single way, whether it's they've come in on a working holiday visa and then switched into another field.
Yep.
So because they're present in the country, they can actually go to interviews.
Yeah.
I've known people who've come in, obviously done the slow certificate of eligibility, get a work visa then come in that way.
Yep.
I think
come in as a tourist and then get on after that, come in as a student and transfer your visa in a different way as well.
That as well.
Yeah.
So I think best to say here would be just to not overthink. If that's your goal, get onto job boards, see what it is specifically that a job is looking for, and then see what you need to do to meet those requirements. Yep. And there's a lot of entry level. I mean, there's tons of people working in service industry in Japan, So like, I think that, well, how did you end up working at a hub? I don't think it was that complicated, like I don't think it is something too stringent. Probably on a working holiday visa or as a tourist. Yep. And then you went to a hub and they had part-time work and they sponsored your visa.
The thing that's really big in Japan is paper trail and having the right papers to actually, prove or accreditate yourself to whatever you're trying to do. So if you're thinking of coming, get that all ready before you leave your country, because sometimes it's hard to get once you're over here. So
yeah, that works. All right. I hope that answers your question well enough, Seamus. That's gonna wrap it up for here, guys. Thanks very much for joining us today, Phil.
Yeah, man, I really enjoyed it. It was fun. Yeah.
And please do consider supporting me on Patreon because it means the world to me. You guys are awesome. If you want your questions to be answered, I'm now returned to health and getting better at managing the workload at my job, so I'm more frequently making these podcasts again. Write to me at davetrippin@gmail.com to have your questions answered. Please do drop a like and a subscribe if you're checking this out on the channel. I hope you enjoyed it if you're elsewhere on iTunes or Spotify, wherever. Thank you so much. Catch you in the next one. The clock has run out.
See ya.
Okay. Lovely. That's it. Okay. Cool.
Content.
Ghetto.
Ghetto.
Oh, yeah. That's